then the next place you're going to point is marketing is not doing enough leads, right? Because you didn't add more marketing resources to feed more sales mouths, right? Like it's a one complex system, and you can't like, you end up looking like there's cartoon characters that are like super built up muscles on the top and like teeny little scrawny stick legs, right? Like you just topple over, and that's what happens.
Well, I think there's another really important piece to this, which is this is not adding another machine to the operational, to the manufacturing floor. Okay, well, we've always done this part by hand. Now we're going to add a machine and it's just going to do it. We're adding people, and we're not adding people who are going to repeatedly do the same thing on an assembly line. We're adding people who are going through a whole process and series of activities with their own personality and their own way of doing things. And those people are all going to do it differently, right? And if we don't have a way to manage that, we have a problem. So not only if I'm the CEO, and my sister Alice will say all the time, if you are the CEO, you are still always responsible for sales. But if I have all of these other things to do, and now I'm responsible for managing not one salesperson, but 10 salespeople, how am I going to do that? And where did I ever learn to manage 10 salespeople anyway? And the processes and systems and guide rails that we need for one salesperson or two salespeople or even three salespeople is really different than what you need when you start getting to 20 or 10 or 20 or 30 salespeople, right? The what changes is everything, not just a piece, right? And this is what Renee is saying. It's not just the people, but it's everything that touches them. It's all the pieces they touch. So it becomes really complicated, right? And I hear this, I don't know if you guys hear this all the time, but I hear it constantly. Well, I've been trying to hire salespeople. I've hired 3 people. I fired 3 people. None of it's working. And I said this at a conference the other day, and somebody walked up to me afterwards and he said, I swear you were reading my mind as I was sitting there. And I'm like, no, this is real. This is what happens. So why doesn't it work?
There's also, I don't understand why we got scaled. We bought a list.
We bought a list. I know. I love that one. Funny story, Liz. I was actually talking to a CEO the other day, and they said exactly what you just said. So then I said, can I talk to some of your sales reps? And can I talk to your marketing people? So I talked to an AE, I talked to an SDR, and I talked to the marketing person. All 3 people said these are individual, private, what we talk about stays on the table, doesn't go back to anybody. They all said the same thing. Stop letting our CEO hire sales people. They don't know what they're doing. And this is a smart individual, but just because you're smart doesn't mean you have the skills to hire every single role in the company.
No. And I think, as I said, I think hiring sales is unique, really unique. All right. So
the one thing I want to say that I feel like gets lost in hiring, just side note, is understanding the relationships they're bringing to the table. So,
and let's jump into that in our next section, because I'm about to go there. So let's jump into it because I think it's so important.
That's your cliffhanger, folks. Tune in next week.
Tune in for our next episode.
And Bryn's answer.
So what makes it hard? Let's just recap. One is that you need systems and processes, and probably the first person who came into the organization figured out how to make things work for themselves and didn't really figure out how they were going to make that work for other people. Or if it was the CEO doing it, they probably don't even know exactly what they did and why it worked. So now we need to figure out what the job is. We need to figure out what the process is. We need to figure out how to hire the right people to do that process. We need to figure out how to manage those people. And we need to figure how many we can support at one time and what needs to change in terms of product, in terms of market, in terms of lead generation. All of those things are going to support all of these new people that are doing sales. Anything to add to that?
I think one of the top things that I think gets glossed over, and again, I'm sitting from a marketing point of view, but this highly impacts sales, is as you're planning to scale, you have to revisit your assumptions for what have gotten you to where you are. And I'll just start with like your target persona, your ICP, your market that you're going to, that if you're going to scale, I haven't yet found an exception to we need to revisit that, because your first customers are often don't look like your next customers. There are things that will always carry through, likely a psychographic of some sort is what's going to, a firmographic or a psychographic or something is what's going to carry through. But you really have to dig in to figure out what is the through line between those first customers and your next customers when you're planning on scale. And you need to, if you don't do what Bren mentioned, which is give up a bunch of customers immediately, if you need those customers to be your bridge to the next thing, you have to find out, I mean, you have to figure out how you're going to segregate those two things, right? Like, I think there's a lot of homework that people just really want to skip because they think, I want to do this today. Especially if it's still a founder-led company, this is where my mind is today and I want to jump to it, right?
Mike, you were going to say something.
Well, I think the piece that the theme or the thread that has kind of been going through a lot of this is be really clear around what your definitions are of the thing that you're trying to do. And make sure that the team's aligned on those definitions, and then make sure that the work that you're doing and the decisions that are made are aligned with those definitions, and then make sure that the decisions are aligned with the next thing. Like you're working the misalignment relative to trying to do this stuff too fast, or doing it because you've got some idea on how it's going to work, is the thing that will create more friction in your business. It will reduce integrity in your business, and we'll get to a situation where everything starts to fall apart. And ultimately you'll lose a lot of people, specifically those people who, because you start to specialize as part of the scaling process, get frustrated that they no longer get to do the thing that they really liked doing before, that they may not have necessarily been good at, but they like doing it, and they're not the right fit. So this is hard stuff. It's very hard stuff.
So can I paraphrase?
Sure.
If you don't want chaos, then you can't just do things haphazardly.
Perfect.
Is that where we are? All right, let's jump in our next episodes. Let's really dive into some of the things that we need to do in order to scale effectively. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Okay. All right. For those of you who are joining us here live, I'm not sure if anybody's with us. Bear with us because we're going to do 4 episodes, and that was our first episode. We're going to do 2 more episodes. Or 3 more episodes after this. Okay, are you guys ready for the next one, which is optimizing the talent you have and hiring for growth? Are we ready?
Sure. Let's do it. Or as Bryn says.
Yeah. So, I do that. I know we're still live, but my grandbaby, when she was a baby, that's how she'd always show excitement. So our whole family now does this. It's like our thing. But
I love it.
So I will be muted on and off because that grandbaby's right here. So
She doesn't seem proud at all, does she?
you want to come over here? Want to say hi? Okay.
No, she'll wait till we're talking and then she'll say hi.
Yeah,
it's okay. All right, are you guys ready?
Yep.
Welcome to this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Renee Bigelow, Mike Simmons, Bryn Tillman, and Daryl Prell. And we're talking about scaling. How do you scale and not end up with total chaos? And in our last episode, we were talking about what are the things that get in the way of scaling successfully. And this episode, we're going to dig into the people side of it, because I think when you're scaling sales, that's probably the hardest part. So we have to optimize the talent that we have, and then we have to hire for growth. And And we need to figure out how to do that. Bryn, tell us what you got.
Okay, so first, optimization. This is relationships in my mind, right? Like, what relationships are we leveraging to scale? So if you have a sales rep or an account manager who
And I
is
just have to stop. For those of you who are not watching and you're listening, I'm trying to put Bryn. I'm the producer, and sometimes I just can't produce, and so I'm trying to hot seat Bryn, and I cannot do it. I have hot seated myself twice, and Renee once, and I can't figure out how to get Bryn in the hot seat. There she is.
There she is.
Yay!
She's there.
All right.
all right, awesome. So all I can say is relationships. That is what matters with scaling. So here's what happens. We have sales reps who are out cold calling. They're relying on marketing to get in leads when everything they need is one introduction away. And this is so important, right? So taking inventory of your connections, whether it's LinkedIn, in your CRM, in your contacts, really just take a look at everyone that you've worked with, that you've brought value to, and start really mapping out who they know. And when you're connected on LinkedIn, you have the ability to do this. But that to me is the fastest, easiest way to scale, because you now have introductions and referrals from folks that already that liked you, loved you, have experienced you, and you're coming in at a high level of credibility, and you get conversations much faster, and those opportunities close much faster. They don't even shop you because you're coming in through referrals. So that for me is the best way to scale any business.
I love that the first thing I wrote down, because this is what I do. I write everything down. You know, our wonderful Liz goes and says, here's the topic. And then I get there and I write. And the first thing I wrote down relationships, which is so wild. And then the second thing I wrote down, though, in relationship to that, is over communicate. So if you're going to actually, because the topic, of course, is how do we optimize our talent and then hire for growth? And that's a two-parter. The first one is how do we optimize or retain or make the talent we have that's working for us, stay? Because when you hire for growth, there's change. Not everybody deals well with change. But if you include them in the process, then they feel like they're part of the solution. So that's where the over communication comes in. And over communication means, this is the opportunity for you, but this is how things are going to change. But this could be a negative for you, just so you know. Are you still on board? So let's talk about it. Let's get that all out. One of the things I would go ahead of, Bryn talked about referrals. I'll say something really stupid, which is offer bounties. Because if I offer a bounty for a referral, after 3 months or a certain milestone is hit, you get paid, $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever it is. Then chances are they're going to refer their better colleagues as opposed to just any colleague. So there we go. Relationships, include them part of it. And that's all this is about, the first part of the equation, which is how do we optimize talent we have so we don't lose them. So then they help us to the second part, which we haven't talked about yet, is how do we hire for growth?
So let's think about, for a second, culture, because sometimes what happens when we start hiring is culture changes. And you may have somebody who's accustomed to being able to sort of do whatever they want, the way they want it. No one has really questioned them as long as they get results. And now you're going to start implementing a new sales culture where there are more guide rails and more rules and more accountability, perhaps. And so we really need to think about, as we're developing the talent that we have to function in this new environment that we're creating, how are we keeping that environment one that they want to be a part of? And frankly, if you want, as Daryl said, for your employees to recommend new employees to hire, you better have a sales culture and a company culture that people want to be a part of. Because if you have a very negative sales culture that's super hyped on closing deals and not relationships, and nobody ever gets thanked, and it's super negative, high stress environment. Unless people are compensated through the roof, they're not going to invite their friends into that, and they're probably not going to stay if it becomes more toxic. So just wanted to throw that out there. Mike, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think one of the things that people have to ask themselves and answer is, what is culture? Like, what is culture inside our organization? Is it culture by design, or is it being allowed to happen for convenience and happens organically? And how do you bridge the gap there? My definition for culture is how we do what we do. And I think if you ask people what the culture is, or what their definition of culture is, and start asking a couple of people inside your organization, you're going to find out that you've got a lot of different perspectives, and it's going to look a lot like that story about the 5 blind people describing an elephant.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk specifically about, so we have a team that we now need to optimize. So to me, the starting place is, what is my team doing well, right? So let's go to the team that I have, whether it's me or one salesperson or a couple of salespeople, whoever we already have in place, managers, salespeople. Let's go back to them before we start adding and figure out, what are they doing? What are they doing well? What is the drag that they encounter every day? And drag is all of those things that interfere with their ability to do their job, which is selling, right? So what is the drag that they're dealing with every day? And if I'm going to multiply this, if I'm going to recreate this for new salespeople, what is it exactly that I want to recreate? So before I can start hiring, I've got to figure out what's working, what's not working, and how do I want to define the new job going forward? Does that, anything you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, the thing that I'll add is just my process for doing it, and it's 3 questions. It's what's working, what's not working, where are we stuck? Like, if we understand those things, then we can get to a point where we start to determine, what do we want to start doing, what do we want to stop doing, and what do we want to keep doing? So start, stop, continue. And yeah, you happen to be on a call with a bunch of consultants who do this stuff. So we kind of follow, we have all of our own different version of how we go through and do it. And if you ask those questions around what's working, what's not working, where are we stuck, and simplify, get a understanding of the specific jobs to be done by the specific role inside the organization to achieve the results you're looking for, then you'll get a better perspective of where your opportunities are. And don't do this in a vacuum. Ask your people. They're committed to the success of the business if they're still in your business and have been with you for this first stage before you move into this next stage.
Okay, so we want to multiply what's working. We do not want to multiply what's not working, right? So if I have a sales rep that's currently wasting 2 hours a day on things that interfere with them selling, what I don't want to do is add 3 more people so we're now wasting 6 hours a day on, right? So we don't want to multiply what's not working. We want to multiply what is working. So our first job is to identify what works. And then we have to map that job. What is this job? What is this sales process? What does this person do? Now, the next step, if we're going to hire for growth, we have to hire people who can do that job. Do not make the mistake that I'm going to hire a salesperson and I'm going to put out a requisition or a job description that says this salesperson is going to prospect and qualify and write proposals and close deals and manage a channel and grow our existing accounts, right? So what you're sure to get is either a liar, a rare unicorn, which to date I have not met one, or nothing. You're not going to get answers that you want. So be really thoughtful about, what is this job that we're hiring for? What is the sales process? What does marketing do? Who does the prospecting? in conjunction with marketing, who writes proposals, who closes deals, who grows account, like who's doing what? And is it realistic for one person to do all of this? And if you are expecting one person to do all of this, what tools are in place to support them to do all of this? But if you've ever read a sales jobs description, do you just read it and go, that's ridiculous? First of all, I need a good communicator. Well, why do you even have to write that down? First of all, and second of all, why have you added all of this nonsense that isn't humanly possible, right?
Do you even know what a good communicator
No.
is? Like, is communication working inside your business? Right. It may or may not be. The other one that's, and there are people listening to this. There are people who've applied for positions that look like this. The answer is not going and taking somebody else's job description and then sticking it on your website.
No.
You know, like, come on, people, like be realistic about what you're trying to accomplish with this specific role. And if you're not clear on it, how can the person coming in be clear? And most of the time when you're talking about scale, the step that you're moving to is you're moving from being very general, a generalist approach to the roles that you have inside your organization, to starting to be more specialized. And as you go through it, it's going to be tough, because you're going to have to tell people they're not going to do that work anymore, or you're going to have to determine what you're going to eliminate from certain roles. So the scale is not about creating more generalists. It's about creating specialists, at least from my perspective and what I've seen work.
Thanks.
So I think, and I love that, Mike, I think what I hear and what I think about kind of piggybacking off of that is that you need to make sure that you know your scale plan that we talked about in a previous episode. Like what are you going to do? Are you going to be expanding markets? Are you going to be upselling current clients? You know, what is your scale plan? And then you hire for that role. Right? You go, okay, this is the direction, the momentum. Even if you're expanding your current relationships, there's a different personality than a hunter. There are different qualities to hire based on how you're looking to approach this. There's also different skill sets based on where you want to go. So let's say you want to go your current offer in a new market. For me, I don't care if someone knows my offer. I want someone that knows the market I want to get into. So I'm going to hire for relationships in the new market. But if I'm doing more offers in an existing market, I probably want to leverage relationships that I already have. So someone that I can bring in and say, "This is my right-hand gal," and and I can create relationships with the ones that I already have because I'm expanding in that same realm. So when you're hiring, you have to really know what your goal is, so you're hiring for the right purposes.
I'll add in that I think I just went through this in a strategic planning session. There's a lot of, in a scale plan, there's a lot of, when we track what's going right, what's not going right, we're going to assess performance, right? It's one of the steps that we're doing, is we're assessing performance so that we can figure out the who attached to the what, right? Like the who's going right, essentially, and then what are they doing that's achieving success. And when you're scaling, the trap in that is much of what you have been doing isn't what you're going to do. So the other trap in that is the way that a lot of people are assessed can be about their potential for the future. And in sales in particular, that needs to be a different metric. I just brought this up in a sales meeting, that in many departments, you're looking for your future leaders, right? You're looking for people that you can move up into management and leadership and how you grow them. In sales in particular, often your top salespeople are not people that you want moving up into management, nor do they want to move up into management. You are often looking for many superstar ICs that can work as a team and that individual contributor. So the composition is part of it. What we want to be, to Bren's point, not just what markets we're going into and the skills or things related to that, but we also need in a scaling situation, everybody needs to contribute more than their individual tasks, right? We need to contribute as the team. So we want to see some people that have some of the skills that we're going to need to grow because they help us with a path that hasn't been cut. They're our trailblazer. I have a company that doesn't have a sophisticated CRM right now. So we have one person on the team who has worked with it. That peer learning that's going to come across, like when everybody else pushes back, why do I have to do this in the CRM? That one person who knows what benefit it is to the salesperson is going to be huge. When we try to build out the automations, that's the one person on the sales side that can say, I know our process here, and this is what our sales team is going to need. We need those skill sets, right? And then the two others that I think are really, really important is, and it goes to that what we've had versus what we'll need, is a lot of your top contributors in sales before you do some sort of scale are often going to get a moment, at the very least, of a scarcity mindset. If you've been the only salesperson and you're bringing other salespeople in, right? Or if you're changing how we've sold it and now I've got to change how I do it, whatever, like that, even if it's just for a moment, there's that scarcity versus growth. And every person that we're bringing in really needs to have growth mindset because we're going to change. Things are going to look different, right? And we need them to see that as opportunity. And then the second part of that is forgiveness and permission. And I think this goes a lot to that entrepreneurial salesperson that you mentioned, Liz, versus, being part of a system or a team as we get bigger. Where your tolerances are in growth and scarcity, it's just as important in this kind of scaling situation where our forgiveness and permission lines are, because we're going to have to do things that we've never done before. And you're going to need some people to be more forgiveness, not permission, because otherwise you'd lose opportunity, right? And then you also need people who are going to be more permission than forgiveness, because we can't be wild, wild west anymore because we're trying to create a system. So I think all of those kind of together, that organizational composition, the what we need for the future, skills, mindset, culture, all of those things, and that forgiveness, permission, and growth versus scarcity is just as important as like words on a job description and tasks and skills that you've done in the past.
No, I agree with all of that. I think that's really important. And I think it's one of the things that makes it hard when you're starting to try to hire a lot of salespeople to sort of balance. I think one of the mistakes that people make when they hire their first couple of salespeople or their first sales manager, they'll make the commitment that, oh, this team is going to grow, we're going to scale, and you're going to be able to be the chief sales officer when that happens. But we don't even know if that person has the right skill set and mindset, and we haven't seen them interact in a way that can convince us that they will be in the right person for that job when it comes up. So be really thoughtful about when you're hiring, making sure people know that there is opportunity for growth, or there will be, but not committing to somebody before you know what the world looks like when it's time to hire that leader. Mike, did you have something?
Hire for what you need now, not for what you need tomorrow. And the reason why I say it that way is because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. You don't know how tomorrow is going to change. You do have an opinion or perspective of what you need today to create that opportunity for change. And it's when you attempt to hire for what you need tomorrow, a lot of times the people who are trying to predict what you need for tomorrow haven't done those things. So it's hard for them to assess the talent pool to determine whether or not you're bringing in the right person. Not only can they talk about how good they can do this thing or whatever it was, but can they actually do the thing? Because there's a difference between people who know about buses, people who've ridden on buses, people who have driven buses and people who fix buses and people who build buses. They're all different roles. They can describe, if you're someone who's only ridden on a bus, someone could describe to you how to fix a bus, and you wouldn't know if they were right or wrong because you don't have the right skill set to be able to assess that. And this is not about buses. This is about hiring sales people, but it applies.
So let's talk about this in more depth, because in the last episode, Daryl said, I think it was Daryl. Mike, did you say it? That people say, don't let the CEO hire any more salespeople. I think
Yeah,
Daryl
it's
said
Daryl's story. Yeah.
And what we know and what I've experienced is that often HR people do not know how to hire sales. In one of my favorite examples of it was working with a company, and the woman who was the head of HR said, we don't hire anybody in this company unless they stayed at their last job for more than 3 years. And well, since the average life cycle for a salesperson in any job is 2, you're going to be hard pressed to use that criteria. So what are some of the other mistakes? Why is it so hard to hire good salespeople?
They were a top seller at another company is one that I see. Like, I don't understand. They were a top seller at company A. I hired them. Why are they not performing here?
And it was usually they were a top seller at a big company like Google or Microsoft, and I have a small business and they're not succeeding here.
Or a top seller in a small business and it's a bigger business, like the mismatch.
The mismatch.
The big one is they had more resources. So whether not necessarily the size of the company, but what their job, to your point, there's like multiple jobs in most sales positions. And if they had external resources helping them with more of those jobs versus if they have to handle those on their own, that's the big mismatch that I see. Or vice versa, if they're used to doing it on their own and have new people they have to work with.
Hang on one second, Bryn. Hang on one second. So I think I've told you this story before, but and I've heard similar things before, but this guy was so blatant. I said, look, you're used to working in a company where you have a lot of support. This is a much smaller company. It's more of a startup, and you really aren't going to get a lot of support. And he was at a big company. And he said, you think we have support? We've got nothing. We get virtually no support. And this was a big name company with a huge sales organization, sales ops, sales enablement, right? Managers and coaching. And I just looked at him and I thought, you're just going to drown, right? Because he had no idea what it meant to not have support. Bryn, what were you going to say?
I don't remember. Wait, what did Renee say?
About the mismatch.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it had something to do with that. So what I have seen, and this kind of goes off exactly what Renee has said, when you're interviewing, ask them, how much did marketing provide leads for you? How much did you do your own hunting? How much did you network in conferences? And did you go to events? And where did your business come from? So just being that top seller, we have to make sure that what made them successful aligns with what we're doing, right? Like that's that piece that Renee was talking about, but kind of bringing it full circle. Find out how they sold. How did you prospect? How did you start first conversations? Did they come from relationships? Did you inherit an account base? I can't tell you how many people inherit an account base and they become incredibly successful sales reps, but when they go to the next job, they're starting from scratch. They don't have necessarily the skill set that, so that they, blew away all their numbers is, based on way different resources.
Or did you have a gift market versus with headwinds? With tailwinds versus a tough market with headwinds, right?
Right.
Mike, you got something?
Yeah, I just from a practical perspective, when you go through this process, and we've already talked about specific skills and being really clear around what those skills are. What are the things that people need to do in order to be successful based on your understanding of the market and of the people of the success that you've had in your business so up until this point, and some of the changes that you're making. Because again, we're going from generalists to specialists typically when we're in this scale mode. when you have that list of skills, make sure that your hiring process has an assessment component where you're assessing those skills. And this is the 3-step process that I use for hiring, and it works pretty well. The first one is, I just want to know, it's going to sound a lot like a sales process. I want to know, can I see a scenario where we would work with each other? I'm just going to validate that there's a chance. That's it. Like, that's all I want to do in that first conversation. And typically the first question I ask to get an understanding is, what questions do you have for me? That's going to reveal everything that I need to know about how much work they did to prepare for that interview.
Because that's exactly how much work they will do to prepare for their sales calls.
Perfect. So then then if they pass the validation step for me, see a scenario where we work with each other, the second interview that I do is a scenario interview. And this is one where I put them in a situation, a scenario where they have to demonstrate skills. And in that scenario interview, I expose them to other members of the team. Like, I bring in people that they're going to interact with who have to play a role so that this scenario aligns with what is something that they will see or do in their operating environment where they demonstrate those skills. In that scenario, once it wraps up and I've seen those skills and whatever time period and whatever thing it is that we're doing, and typically if it's an account executive, discovery and initial discovery call is a really good thing to do because they don't need to know a lot about your business in order to be able to do it. You can demonstrate curiosity, you can show how they manage a conversation, how they manage multiple people in that kind of operating environment. The next thing I do is I provide some very direct coaching as part of that scenario. And what I'm assessing for there is, are they coachable? Do they get defensive? How do they react? And I'm direct. You guys see it in these things when we're ever on these things. I don't mix words, and I'm intentionally trying to get people to get defensive. And it's not because I want to trick them. It's because I want to understand, are they going to be able to deal with the stuff that happens when all of this gets really, really hard? Because it will get hard. And then the third stage, so if they make it through the first stage, validation, second stage, capability assessment and coachability. And then the third stage is they get to meet the owner or the senior executive or whoever the person is. And that's where you get into the kind of like the more detail of, hey, is this person really going to be the right fit for the organization? And each time that they move through a stage, just like salmon swimming upstream or your deals moving through your sales process, their probability of sale or probability of success increases. If you do not have that in your environment, you're committing malpractice, and you will get into a situation where you mishire people, and then you will get into that situation where you have to let them go or they decide to exit. And either way, you're going to slow yourself down. So have a process, work the process, and then look at the data associated with it to determine if it actually works. Anyhow, hopefully that's helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think the mistake that gets made so often is, this person tells a great story. Sell me a pen. If you can sell me a pen, then you must be a great salesperson, right? If somebody asked me in a sales interview to sell them a pen, I would probably walk out. So we want to know, can this person do the job? Not do they tell great stories? Not do they can they, tell you that they exceeded their sales goal. And by the way, 60% of salespeople do not hit their sales goal. So if 100% of the people you interview tell you that they exceeded their sales goal, either you have magically found the right people or they're lying to you, right? 100% of people did not hit their sales goal. In fact, 60% of American salespeople do not. So when you're interviewing, how are you going to figure out, other than asking them, did you hit your sales goal, whether they know how to hit a sales goal, whether they know how to fill their funnel, whether they know how to prospect, whether they know how to do the things that they will need to do in order to be successful. Any last thoughts on hiring?
Just
All right.
I'll reinforce it one more time. And I know I sound like old man shouting at clouds type thing, but like this, have a process, work the process. If the process is yielding the right results, keep using that process. If the process is not yielding the right results, figure out how to adjust the process. Don't make it any more complicated than that. It's hard. The person you're talking to wants a job. The person who's talking to that person wants to fill a seat in the organization. You both have these things that you want, and especially in hiring sales roles, you can get yourself into a situation where you can sell yourself on the idea that this person is going to be an amazing fit because of X, Y, or Z. Look for the positive stuff. We all have biases that we apply. So have a process and then have controls in there to help make sure that your process is working. And you'll know in your data, if you're one of those organizations who goes out there and hires 5 people just to see which 2 or 3 work, stop doing that. You're impacting people's families. You're impacting your customers. You're impacting your team.
Yeah.
So
I have-
that's my ad.
Yeah.
I have 2 tips to end on, because we did cover these in our whole conversation, and they're very practical. One is have kind of an org chart in mind for where you're headed in growth. I'll give a perfect example in this. As a company scales, one of the top things that you'll see happen is breaking off account management and sales, right? So if you know that's coming in a few months, or if you have an idea that maybe this person has good inside sales experience, you have both of these positions, maybe you can put them on the inside sales or account management. You want to see if they're applying for outside sales. Have your org chart in mind, because you're going to run into a lot of really good talent in these interviews, and talent's kind of hard to find. So you might be very myopic on who you're hiring, but if you think about like many of those things that Mike talked about like what felt good, did this feel like a good person to work with? Did they have some good skills? Don't immediately reject without looking at the rest of the org chart. And then the second is, if you still want to reject, but you still had a lot of positive feelings about that person, I have some clients that pass leads, talent leads back and forth. Maybe one doesn't have quite the experience. We interviewed 5 salespeople. There were 3 in here that were great. They're not going to fit our model, either it's our comp model or our market or whatever. And they're sharing those talent leads back and forth and referring them back and forth. Get yourself in one of those situations too, because it's really rough out there on the talent market to find what you need, your flavor of a unicorn, what you need to help you scale, what you need to fit your culture, what you need for those skill sets, has relationships, all those. So get yourself one of those buddies where you can kind of pass along some talent leads as well.
So, and I have just one final thought on this, and that is smash all of the stereotypes you have about what you think a salesperson is, right? We tend to hire people who are like us. We tend to think that salespeople are brash and obnoxious and bold and overly confident. None of those things are necessarily true. We have a stereotype that men are salespeople or make better salespeople than women. The data tells us something different altogether. We also know that if you interview one woman, the chance that you will hire that person is very, very low. If you interview 2 women, the chance that you hire a woman increases by 60%, regardless of how many other people you hired. So kind of put aside your stereotypes and interview people who have the skill sets and the experience that you need, as opposed to fitting some mold that you have in your head about what a salesperson is. All right, let's wrap that up. And we're going to dive into our next episode. So join us for our next episode, because we're going to talk more about process, but we're going to go sales process, not hiring process. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Okay, let's wait for Renee to get back. Boy, they're dropping out, Mike.
We were losing people.
Oh, we're losing.
We've got some people in the chat. It looks like we have a couple of questions that came, or not questions, comments that came up. Did you see those in the?
I don't know how to see those. I'm not very good at this.
Lower right-hand corner inside your app, if you see the chat button.
Look at this. We do have people here. Thanks for joining us. There isn't fixed formula. I think scaling the existing customer gets you the kick up, relationships plus timing. Back to that question, I think you're absolutely right. When we can grow our existing customers, it's the least expensive, most effective way to get new business. So that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, let's jump into our next episode. Are you guys ready? And
Always.
Daryl may join us again, so you guys keep an eye out for me. Let's see. There we go. Whoops. Oy. Okay. All right. Well, let me just make sure that I'm where I need to be. Here we go. All right. I'm really not a good producer, you guys, but
You
we're
are
all
where
right.
you need to be. You are awesome.
Okay. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I'm here with Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and we may have Daryl Prell and Bryn Tillman drop in on us while we're talking. So if you hear different voices, that's who that will be. And we're talking about scaling. In this series of episodes, we've been talking about scaling. How do you scale a sales organization without ending up with utter chaos? And there's something innate in scaling that brings about chaos, but what can we do to minimize it? And I think that the next logical place to go is if I am going to add several new salespeople or a lot of new salespeople, what worked for 1 or 2 or 3 salespeople isn't going to work for 5, 6, 10, 20, 30 salespeople. Because when you have a couple of salespeople, if everybody doesn't do everything exactly the same way, you tend to be able to compensate for that. When you have a number of people, 10, 20, 30 people who don't have guide rails, who don't have clear accountability, who don't have clear process to follow, the chaos multiplies as the number of people that you add increases. And it really, I feel like the chaos becomes exponential. I don't know if you guys, Mike is nodding his head. Yes, it becomes exponential. And it's what I hear from my clients. I've added a bunch of new people and it's chaos around here. Nobody knows what anybody's doing. So what we want to talk about now, and what my question to the crew is, what processes, guide rails, accountability systems do we need to put into place as we add new salespeople, as we're scaling and we're growing?
So
Go ahead,
Okay, wait. For those of you who haven't been with us before, we have a larger crew than this, but the 3 people that are on this session right now, Mike, Renee, and Liz, me, we are your process people. We love process. And so Renee and Mike can't decide who gets to talk first. So I'm going to let Renee talk first, and then I'm going to get Mike up here.
I was just going to say, because I probably like the outcome of process more than I like process. I force myself into process.
Right.
So with that in mind, I just kind of want to frame it. I literally had this conversation an hour before I joined you today with a client, and we were talking about this, and he was talking about managing sales, right? He's overseeing sales himself, the CEO. And one of the things I described with a playbook, essentially, which is a piece of process. It's got a sequence of things that you're going to do. It's got some templates to help you. And I said, we context switch all day long, and sales is context switching more than most roles. And having the playbook and having templates, other people call things scripts. I don't, because no one should ever use someone else's script. But unless you're an actor, nobody wants to buy from an actor. But that form of having those things available to you and other parts of a sales process keep you on track when you context switch throughout the day. You're talking to one client, you got to remember the other things from another client. You're doing account management, you got to come back and do prospecting, whatever it is. Having those things in front of you allow you to context switch much more effectively and efficiently. And that's just kind of what I'll put as a frame to talking about process.
The thing, this is not a super surprise for anybody who's listened to these for long enough. The thing that I would make sure that you do as you go through this is first, let's make sure we define what process is. Like what does the word process mean inside our organization, for the people who are around the organization? Because your definition of what a process is might change. I don't think so. I think process is a pretty simple thing to define. From a job to be done perspective, the job of a process is to achieve a result if each step is followed in that specific order. We expect that if every step is followed, kind of like putting together, baking something, recipe, and following a set of instructions, you expect that the output is going to be the same based on everybody following that same process. But come together as a group and first define process, then define the specific job to be done of that specific process. Are we looking at it from a rep perspective, like what the rep approach is, how the sales rep approaches process? Are we looking at process for forecasting purposes? Are we looking at it for a way that we engage with customers? Are we looking for something else? Like, what is the thing that we're doing there? Because the biggest mistake I see in the organizations that I've had a chance to work with over a number of years is people say sales process and someone defines it as how the customer buys, and someone says sales process and someone defines it as that's how the rep sells, and someone says sales process and someone has another view of it. Like, it's not that either of those are wrong or couldn't be interpreted differently depending on the lens that you look at things through, but make sure you're aligned inside your business. What's our definition of process? What's the specific job to be done of this process? And then go from there.
So let me jump in on that, because I think you said a whole bunch of things in that last statement that can be unpacked. So the first is, I have no valid sales process if I do not understand the buyer journey, right? So the very first thing before I do anything is I need to understand the journey my buyer goes through in order to get from identifying that they have a problem to making a decision whether to buy from me or buy from somebody else or not to buy at all. That journey matters. Not every buyer goes through the same journey, but there are a variety of journeys that my buyer is going to go through. And some of it will depend on whether they are at the point in their buyer journey where they come looking for me, or whether I'm going to find them before they're ready, even starting their buyer journey. So understanding the buyer journey and where we interact with that buyer journey matters. We can't create a sales process without it. And I started talking lately about the seller journey. There's a sales process that the seller follows, but there's a journey that they go on with the buyer, right? They're going on a unique journey together and unraveling this problem, solving this problem, climbing this mountain, slaying this dragon, whatever it is that we're doing, we're on a journey with our buyer. And if we don't recognize that journey doesn't always, sometimes there's detours and sometimes you backtrack and sometimes other things happen along this journey with this buyer. The next thing is to think about this process, which is a much more structured kind of word, right? A process has guide rails and definitions and agreement on how it works, what we will do when, how we will do it, what steps can't be missed, what information must be gathered, what things must be approved. These are processes that often check boxes that need to be addressed in order to successfully close a deal, because if we leave out important steps, that deal may not close, or the deal may close and a disaster of a delivery may result because we didn't follow the steps. Or it may be delayed because we didn't follow the steps. So we want to be really thoughtful. I think those are three different things. Mike, what do you think? Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know your customer, that journey, you know your business, your process for either fulfillment or forecasting, either one of those, and those are two separate things. And then you know your approach as a rep, and that's basically a RevOps model that in the way that you can look at revenue operations inside an organization in a very simple format. And the challenge that happens is people tend to come in with a different view, and they'll use different words to describe the thing that they're working on. The other thing that Liz talked about time, the amount of time that it takes to go through things. Process for me is more about gates, and they're not necessarily time bound. They're driven by either decisions or conversions that happen as they move through it. And you can look at time and say, are people getting stuck? And if so, we can add additional steps to help make the conversions happen a little bit faster, like make the conversions not as big. So there's different ways to kind of work through it. And you see some of these like mini lines from a conversation I had with a client earlier today. Like the big challenge that I see happen over and over and over again. And we've got some interesting questions that we might want to get to here. But the big challenge that I see happen over and over again is someone says sales process, and everybody hears it, nods their head, and says, okay, but their perspective of it is a little bit different, which gets into the Princess Bride joke that I like to use, which is inconceivable, but like it just happens over and over and over again. Liz, do you want to hit up on some of the questions here?
I do. Before I do that, though, I want to say one thing, and that is that this agreement on definitions, on order, these things matter. In fact, I spoke with a client the other day who I had worked with in the past, and they merged with another company, and we got everybody to agreement on what are the stages, what are the definitions, what happens, when does it happen, what does it mean, how does it move. We got all of that in agreement, and they added 2 sales teams together, and suddenly none of that was true. There was no agreement anymore. So it's really important. We have a guest asking us questions, so I want to jump to those really quickly. One of the questions that he asked was, does process have to change every 6 months, or do playbook versions change? So before I can answer that, though, Mike, the difference between a playbook and a sales process.
Well, process is a series of things that happen in a specific order to achieve a outcome. Like that's process. Playbook is a combination of, could be a combination of processes and tools. Ultimately your operating system, revenue operating system that you apply. So you might apply specific plays or apply specific tools. Sometimes people look at specific calls as plays. The quickest way to go and distinguish between playbook and process, I think, is to look at American football and think of what Bill Belichick would say relative to trusting the process and building the team. But then you have a playbook where you run specific passing plays versus specific running plays inside that operating environment, and everybody on the team knows what their role is in that specific play. What's their specific job to be done? And by doing their job well and focusing on their job, which is part of how Belichick operated that team, or at least what they've said about how he operated that team, then you've got people who are moving toward the same objective, have an understanding of where they fit in that thing, and they can get those things done. So that's how I would distinguish the difference between process and playbook. What do you think?
I think that's pretty close. Renee, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, playbook is just one, essentially, right? It's one process. You have inside of larger processes, you're going to break things down into bites, right? And in most places, I'm not saying I couldn't be proven wrong that there are exceptions to this, but in most places, you're going to have multiple smaller processes that you could call a playbook that fit in a larger process. So it's just, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? A playbook is probably one of those bites, right? And it's used, as Mike said, in certain situations. And we pull this one out for this and this one out for this. We're all focusing on this quarter. This is the playbook for this priority. But the overarching processes, they're all processes, but there's a hierarchy to processes. And playbook typically sits lower than an overall sales process.
And so we might have a playbook for when we come up against a certain competitor, or we might have a playbook when someone has a certain objection, or we might have a playbook when there's a very specific thing happening that we've seen happen all the time. These are the
expansion market. An expansion market where we've never talked to this kind of customer before, a new territory. We have a playbook for that. Whatever whatever the situational need for a mini process is.
And this is why the conversation inside your organization is super important, because our perspectives on what those things are slightly different. I would describe what Liz and Renee are talking about are the specific plays that put into the playbook, and the processes in the plays combined create the broader playbook. That's my definition. It doesn't mean it's right. Like
But this is super important, because it's one of my struggles when somebody says, I want a playbook. And everybody has such a different idea of what does that mean. Do you want me to tell you what words your salesperson's going to say in each interaction? Do you, like, what people means something different. So let's back up for a second on one of the questions that was asked then was, how often do we need to iterate our
Can I add one more thing just on that? On that. Oh, and it's super quick. Liz hit the nail on the head with the what does that mean question. And we don't ask it enough, meaning when people use a word, we don't ask, what does that mean to you? Like, and it frustrates some people on the other end when they get that question, because it's not, like for me, when I ask the question, I'm not asking the question because I think you're an idiot. I'm not asking the question because I want you to start doing what I do. I'm not asking the question for anything other than I want to make sure from a communication perspective, we're going to be communicating with each other in a way that we understand what's happening. There are things that are said, there are things that are heard, and there are things that are remembered. And very rarely are they the same. If you're using if you have different meanings for different words, or different words for the same thing, people will get thrown off. And so Liz, thanks for letting me interrupt you and jump and adding that.
That's okay. And definitions matter. I spend a great deal of time with my clients talking about sales process and what different words mean, and what we are going to agree on is the definition.
Yes.
So this is not uncommon.
I was just in a strategic planning session, and it was a lovely one. Everyone was in agreement and alignment, but the one place there was a spirited discussion, even it wasn't heated, wasn't negative, was what is the definition of a new customer?
Right.
There were 3 different definitions going in the room, and someone said, I'm sorry, we have to stop. We have to define when we're talking 2026, what is the definition of a new customer?
Okay, so let's go back to this question. How often do you need to iterate your sales process? So let's put it back into the bigger context. So the bigger context is, we want to scale. If we want to scale, we need to first create sales process, guide rails, rules, definitions, process for accountability, process for communication. All of that has to be created. Now, if we're adding people and we already have that stuff, we need to iterate on that process, meaning we need to revise it. But how often does it need to be revised? Is this and Mike, I'm going to pull you up here. I'm going to put you on the hot seat here without your permission. Is this something that happens every 6 weeks? I mean, I go into companies where it hasn't changed in 10 years, which is a little too long to just assume things haven't changed. But how often do you really have to change the sales process or the sales playbook?
It's like that, the owl, eating the Tootsie Roll Pop. Yeah. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop?
We just showed our age.
What's that?
We just showed our age.
Oh, it is. It's fine. The wrinkles and the gray hair show it a little bit faster, at least on my end. If at any point in time you're not achieving the results you want to achieve, then go in and start to look at where are the gaps, where are the breaks, where's there what's changed, where's there an opportunity to think a little bit different, do it a little bit different, be a little bit different on that side. So it's not a specific time piece. I do think it's helpful to continue to look at your KPIs to determine, are they trending in the right direction? Has something changed significantly? If so, then let's go a little bit deeper. And I look at KPIs on a daily basis. Yet I'm not making decisions on what to do on that stuff on a daily basis. For me, if I'm ever implementing something new, I like it to go through at least 3 sprints, and 3 sprints are 2 week. Sprints is 2 weeks, so a 6-week period before starting to make an adjustment. Potentially as many as 6 of those sprints, so 90 days. But I don't think any of this is really. There's no hard and fast rule on how often process should change. It's more about, are you actually achieving the results that you're looking for? If so, keep going. If not, then maybe it's time to adjust or iterate.
I have a refinement that I can offer around some of that, because I agree with Mike. It's situational, but I've worked in enough scaling organizations. Since we're talking a lot about scaling today, I'll offer this as a tip. There are 2 times particularly in fast scaling organizations. If you are fairly stable and you aren't making lots of changes in your business and everything, annual tends to work pretty well, right? However, if you are scaling and you are adding anything along the way, new process, new department, new people, new tools, lots of customers, you're going to need to scale. You're going to need to review your processes, because you're literally building the plane while you're flying it, right? So you're going to need to review them a lot. And in most scaling organizations, you're doing some form of quarterly review. And I would say it at least warrants a good hour review, like where you're going through and just saying, does anything pop out at me that doesn't match today like it did in the last quarter? And then the second time is when you add something, you should stop and do that same hour. So if you're breaking off account management, and I use this one because it's so common, right? Breaking off account management and sales, right? To customer support or customer service or customer success or anything where you're breaking these things out, right? That's a good time to review process. If you're adding new salespeople, this is a good time to review process, because you may be changing somebody who did one role, maybe doing something else. If you're adding in ops, if you're adding technology or tools, right? Those are really good moments. So in a fast scaling organization, those are the 2 that I say at least warrants a quick review of, do we need to address this or can it keep going?
And so I've got one sort of final piece on this, and that is that we have to remember why we have a sales process. We have to remember why we're doing this, and we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One is we want everyone in the organization speaking the same language, doing the same things. If everyone is doing something different and using different terms to mean different things, as a manager, as an owner, as a CEO, as a CFO, I have no way to understand what is really happening. You wouldn't do that on your manufacturing floor, right? You wouldn't say on the manufacturing floor that we have 3 different ways to use this term of, like, we use conversion in sales and marketing, right? Everybody uses that word differently. But if you were on the manufacturing floor, complete is complete. Closed has different meanings in sales, but complete is complete, right? The manufacturing process is complete. Everyone knows what it means. That this step 1 is done. Everyone knows what that means. But in sales, we don't have that. So if we don't have a common language that we're all sharing, as a leader, I have no visibility into what's really going on. The second thing is that I want to create tools that support my sales organization. I can't do that if we're not all using the same language, doing the same things, following a similar process or the same process. How do I create tools to support them? How do I create metrics to measure? How do I predict results when I don't even know what language? What does it mean if it's in this stage in the funnel and I don't know what that means for 3 different salespeople? I don't know how to predict what the revenue is going to be 6 months from now. So we're doing this so that we can communicate, so that we can predict, so that we can hold people accountable, so that we can manage what seems unmanageable, and we can get an expected outcomes. Now, sales is always somewhat unpredictable, but the better we can be at using the process and the system and the languages, the more predictable it can be.
Liz, can I just yes and?
Yes, and go ahead.
This is just Renee from the marketing point of view. I have to yes and, because I think you just outlined that so well from the executive and the sales internal point of view. I'm going to yes and from the external point of view. If you don't have a good process that you are moving people through, it is going to kill your brand. Let me explain. If every single customer has a different experience with your brand is schizophrenic, right? If they can't recommend to someone else that they're going to have the same experience, or if one person has a so-so experience, one has a horrible experience, one has a wonderful experience, you're getting mixed signals out in the market about your brand. So part of having a process is to make sure that you can ensure at least a minimum level of experience and somewhat standardized experience that becomes associated with your brand. So we talked about the buyer journey and the seller journey. And when we're doing process, we're matching these two things up and wrapping our brand around it, what it needs to fit for the company and the product and everything else, right? The reason for that is so that people have a good experience, no matter which side of that journey they're sitting on.
Yeah. And I just went through that with my cable company, where one person told me that there was no way to help me. And somebody else said, once I decided I was canceling, they said, oh, well, we could have done this for you. I said, well, this is a brand problem, right?
And this proves it. You're on a podcast talking about how a negative experience with their brand, even though you ended up with a positive experience.
No, I ended up with another company.
Well, I meant someone said, oh yeah, you can do it. We can.
After I had already made the decision to leave.
Yeah, but even then, you still would have talked about the negative.
Right. So the other thing that we want to do with a sales process that is really critical, remember, is that we're measuring momentum. We want momentum, and we're measuring momentum, and it helps our salespeople know when they're successful in creating momentum. Okay, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Sales SOS podcast, talking about scaling and how process and systems and accountability help us to scale more effectively. And in our next episode, we are going to really lean on Renee Bigelow, because we are going to talk about sales and marketing, primarily what marketing's role is in helping to scale a sales organization. So join us in the next episode. Okay. Ready? Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I am here with Renee Bigelow and Mike Simmons, and we are talking about scaling. How do you scale a sales organization without chaos? And while there is some inherent chaos in all scaling, what we want to do is minimize it. So in the last 3 episodes, we have been talking about some of the reasons that we get chaos. We talked about hiring to improve scalability. And also we talked about processes. And now we're going to talk about something really important. And that is, what is marketing's role in scaling sales? Like, we think about marketing and scaling an organization, but actually marketing has a very specific role in helping the sales organization scale. Because when we're talking about scaling, we're talking about repeatability. We're talking about having things in place that everyone uses. So Renee, start us off. And then Mike, I'm going to have you talk about what we wish marketing would do.
Well, I'll tell you, it's going to take a different, the exact definition is going to differ in every company, largely depending on the motions that they take.
The definition of what, Renee?
Of like what marketing can do to help scale sales, because some companies are extremely sales driven and very marketing immature. Some are very product led growth or marketing led growth or channel led growth, right? And marketing has a different role in each of those situations. However, across the board, I can tell you these 2 things. One, marketing's role is to help grow the brand, for sure. And when you grow the brand, you grow demand, which helps sales, right? So you have that all the time. When it comes to helping sales in particular, a lot of it is going to depend on the go-to-market motions that you have established in the company and what your growth plans are. It could be driving leads, right? 100%. It could, however, be depending on where the resources have been allocated in the market and what those motions are, it could be enabling sales. I have been in some companies where the sales enablement is much bigger lift immediately in a scaling organization, right? So you always have to be growing the brand, or you never get to the point where you're really truly helping sales and helping grow the company. So growing the company, which is growing the brand, sits at one level. And then what are the things that you need to do to help sales hit the next number is a different thing that you have to keep both moving all the time, right? Like growing the brand may not be helping sales with the specific tactics that they need to get to a number this quarter, for instance. So I'll just kind of start with that as sort of an overall, because it really does change so much depending on those motions and the internal capacities inside of an organization, how it's set up.
So I'm going to jump to Mike here in a second, but I just want to reiterate one of the things that Renee said, which is one of the things that marketing does for an organization is it sets a tone. It creates a language. It creates some commonality around the way we express certain things. And without that tone, without that brand, it is hard for salespeople to deliver consistently in different selling environments, or different salespeople to deliver the same experience to different customers. So that tonality is super important. Mike, jump in here. What do we need? Aside from all of the brilliant things that Renee just said, what else do we need marketing to do for us as we're trying to scale our sales organization?
Yeah. So my thinking has shifted over the years on this, and it's this kind of evolution and blurring of interactions that happen with the customer. And remember what Renee has talked about before, and Liz has talked about, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. There's this person or a group of people who are going through a journey, who have a problem that they want to solve, and they want to actually be successful at some point in time. And ideally they tell other people about it. They're going through that journey. The journey doesn't stop when they made a purchase. So it doesn't stop at the point of sale. It continues. And one of the things that marketers do really, really well that I have not figured out how to do well. I'm a sales guy. I'm a success guy. I'm a person who works one-on-one with people to help them achieve a result. Marketing can do this one-to-many very, very well. And they use data, and they use language, and they use an understanding of psychology, and they use all of these different levers and dials and triggers that can be pulled to help enable customers to make decisions or shift perspective or envision a future on a one-to-many basis. And they can use the feedback that they get from all of the data to help make more informed decisions. Now, as a sales professional, what I do really, really well is I can take the feedback that I get from the individual that I'm talking to and then adjust and iterate in real time on that side. On the marketing side, it's not necessarily, I think, and Renee, correct me if I'm wrong here, there's not an immediate feedback that's happening in the moment. It's feedback that you start to see over a period of time that helps to inform where you want to make some adjustments. So if you think about it from a one-to-many and one-to-one perspective, how can marketing enable and enhance what I'm able to do from a sales perspective one-to-one by being able to communicate out from a one-to-many perspective across a group, and then us work together where we get to meet the people, the humans, at the point where they need to be met, where we can help them break through that next challenge. Because sometimes when you want to cross a big, space, it's more helpful when someone can reach their hand out directly and pull you across, or they can pick you up and carry on their shoulders. And that's the one-to-one interaction. In other instances, they need the one-to-many stuff because they're just not ready to work one-on-one. So that's how my thinking has changed around this. It's not as much of, hey, this is when marketing picks it up and passes it over to sales, and then sales picks it up and then passes it over to success. It's not that thing as much anymore. It's more of like how do we play really well with each other and support our customers at the right time in the right place across all of those functions.
So I used to describe this as if you've run track and field and you see a relay race, I used to describe this, Mike, to your point, in the evolution, right? I used to describe this as a relay race, and you hand off a baton, right? There's one exception really to all this, which is marketing never steps away from the customer, right? Like marketing is present all the way through. Marketing is still present when a customer is in the sales portion of the buying journey.
Yep.
Marketing is there before, marketing is there after, and marketing activates them to bring more people in. So to your point, I do have to say, marketers do a lot of one-on-one. I invite you to join a brand social page any day and see that with live reactions. And if you are doing it right and build enough of a brand, you actually have a community, and there's a lot of one-to-one that marketing picks up inside of community management. But it's different than sales because it's different parts of a journey, right? And the difference is marketing is there through all of it. However, marketing doesn't lead in every step of the journey. And a person told me several years ago, and I'm just not that big into this sport, but I looked it up and it is such a perfect analogy that in bike racing, when you have a team, you often put somebody who's really good at the ascent, right? You put them in the lead and they take that part of the journey. And then when somebody's really good on the flat straightaways, you put them in the lead on that part of the journey, right? So that's a little bit more of an apt metaphor to use there. And I think that that's really important. So when I say that it can vary so much depending on the organization, it depends because marketing is also always there in the journey. We're going to pick up at different points depending on where the strengths of sales are or how sales sits in the journey, right? Because in some places, sales is only parts of the customer base because there might be product-led growth or direct to consumer or something like that. And sales only picks up when it reaches a certain level. That doesn't mean marketers only market to the people that touch sales, right? So marketing should be, particularly in a scaling situation, kind of looking, when I talked compositionally about the sales staff in our earlier conversation about you want a composition of complementary skills. You don't want all people who are trying to be the sales manager. That's chaos. You need people who do want to stay really good individual contributors too. And you need some growth mindset. You need some forgiveness, some permission, right? You want that composition. Marketing and sales, customer success, all of those departments that interact with the customer, you need to look at the composition of those as well. And you need a composition that complements each other. So if you have a really strong sales, then that's an area where you can help them by possibly really propping up the before they touch and the after they touch. If you have both of the before and after, of the sales and customer success really good, then you can spend a lot of your time on the top of funnel. But you also, I have yet to find really a company where they also activate that really well into bringing more people into the funnel, right? So you may have marketing working at the very top and at bringing that activation in. So you have to kind of look at where you have the motions covered and you're doing really well, and use marketing to kind of bring in that extra artillery to the other places and make sure it works well. And that's where I think a lot of sales marketing alignment, I never had a customer that didn't start with, we got a problem with marketing and sales alignment. Like, it's so common. And a lot of it is because they don't understand. They think marketing is only supposed to be doing like this top of funnel activity, and everything's kind of broken through. It's, if you think of marketing as ever present and you fill those gaps and help prop up what helps sales scale, right? If sales is being asked to do something new, then marketing's got to kind of work around that and help them get to that point. So I hope that's an easier way to kind of think about it.
I want to jump in for a second, Mike, if that's okay. I want to be really practical for a second. So I have a couple of salespeople, they're doing whatever they do, and now I want to scale my team. What do I want marketing to do for me as a sales leader or a company owner to help keep my sales organization as a cohesive unit with a cohesive brand and a cohesive message. Right? That is one of the things that needs to happen if we're going to scale. You can't have 25 salespeople sending out things that look different, sound different, reply differently, right? We need to have some consistency. So some of the stuff is the obvious, right? The brand. How do we show up on social media? How do we show up? You know, what is our logo at the bottom of an email? Do we put our phone number and our address? Like what's there? How do we make sure? How does marketing help to make sure that our sales reps are reachable, that they're presented in the right way? What does a proposal look like? What other kinds of templates do we need that enable us to show up branded as a company? I think another thing that it's really important that marketing can help with is understanding the buyers and the buyer journey. I think while salespeople are really clear about their interactions, sometimes it takes an outside person to sort of look in and go, when do they start interacting? How do they start making, where do we come in, right? Sort of taking us through this journey and really looking at the points where where our organization interacts with the client along their journey, and how we are going to address that through sales and marketing activities. So if we have that, it's really helpful. I think another thing that marketing can do is to help the salespeople understand who are all of the buyers that are involved in this buyer journey. If we have, and when I'm talking about sales, my mind is always in a complex business to business sale. And I know that everybody who's listening is not involved in that, but when you are, there are multiple buyers with multiple relationships to the problem and multiple attitudes about different kinds of solutions. And so the better we can understand who those different buyers are, what their relationship to the problem is, how they talk about it, what kinds of triggers are going to make them make a decision or refuse to make a decision, that kind of woven tapestry helps us as salespeople show up in the right way with the right people. So I'm just sort of beginning to lay out what these things might be. But as we begin to think about, I am a salesperson in this landscape of this company, and the more marketing can help weave the tapestry, the better my ability to be creative where I need to be creative, as opposed to trying to be creative about things that I shouldn't be creative about. And Mike, you ready to jump in?
Sure. I mean, like, well, number one, I'm not good at words. Like it's not my strength. It's I'm good at reading reactions and seeing that kind of stuff, and then kind of figuring out how to communicate with folks in that environment. But that doesn't translate well when I'm not in the room. So if you know what your strengths are and you know what your weaknesses are, you can lean on other people to help build you up and build on those pieces. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make as leaders inside organizations is when we set up metrics that we use to measure different groups on that are not directly aligned with each other to handle some of those baton handoff pieces that Renee was talking about a little bit earlier. Like the big one is the whole like MQL to SQL to whatever.
Marketing qualified lead,
Yeah.
to sales qualified lead, to qualified, right?
Opportunities and all that kind of stuff, and we get confused, and people, if the measurements are not aligned, not really thought about relative to like leading indicators, and how those leading indicators are actually lagging indicators for other groups, and then the conversions that happen in between, and then how those can be shared among teams, then you get yourself into a situation where, especially if compensation is part of the equation here, where you get people potentially working toward different objectives that are misaligned. And when those misaligned objectives come in, now people have agendas, and those agendas, because they want to keep their job, they want to demonstrate that they're really doing really good stuff, or they even want to empire build. Like I've seen instances inside organizations where companies want to be marketing led, and some companies want to be sales led, and some companies want to be product led, and some companies want to, and nobody really wants to know who's leading, and everybody wants to report to the CEO, and all of those things turn into a mess. So I think my takeaway from the conversation is be really clear about how you're communicating with each other inside the organization, the value that people can deliver inside each of those organizations. And if you aren't clear on what your skills or what your strengths are, go and do some reflection or ask people inside the organization, and then go get others involved. Because things I wish I would have done better early on in my career is create better alignment between sales and marketing, and nowadays you'd call it success, but that whole retention and expansion side of things.
I think, hang on one second, Renee. I think what was not stated outright in what Mike said, but that he implied, was that the end result, it doesn't matter how many people click, it doesn't matter how many conversations we have, if nothing ever closes, we're not in alignment, right? So when we talk about measuring success, somewhere along the line, everyone in the company needs to be tied to closing deals. So if the product doesn't solve the problem that our customers want, we're not going to close deals. If we're getting the wrong people on the front end of the funnel, because marketing is reaching out to the wrong people that aren't going to be the people that buy, we're not going to close deals. As an organization, we are all part of the customer's decision to purchase, and we all need to be compensated in some way. I'm making sure that we have a sellable product. Customers know how to find us. The right people know how to find us, and they're able to take this journey with us and make a buying decision. And when we can align that way in our thinking, we'll be more successful. Mike, did I get that right?
Yeah, I think so. You said it much better than I did.
Liz, I just had to set, we mentioned this in an earlier podcast. We're all like neck deep, eyeballs deep in strategic planning season. And I just had to set KPIs for marketing. And it's sort of the first time marketing in this organization has had to set some real KPIs that weren't just kind of throwing things at a dartboard. And I said, particularly with where we are in the marketing maturity, but also because many of the marketing metrics that you see out there are absolute fallacy, and they are attribution crack. Now, you all know how much I use, and this is an unpopular statement, but you all know how much I use data, right? Like there are many pieces of data that I will use for something, and a lot of them are the same ones that people will set as KPIs. But I don't think they should be set as KPIs, because there are problems with many of those numbers, and you need to know what those problems are. I go screaming mad every time I see somebody measuring open rate on an email, because open rate is a bogus number now, because every single email opened on Apple, which happens to be one of the top mail services, shows as opened. They graciously show everything that hits their servers is opened so that I can't track their customers. So everybody's like, my open rates are so high. I'm like, well, yeah, right? So Apple shows everything is opened. So I say that to say those numbers are not what we need to be deciding on the health. That they help marketing make decisions, but they help marketing make decisions for internal things that we're going to choose, right? They aren't what we choose, what we decide the success of the company on. So yeah, you want to get into the weeds with me in a one-on-one with marketing, and we'll go through all these numbers, and we can decide where we might see some levers and some throttles and some bottlenecks and things we could try, all of that, absolutely. But when I say what are the KPIs for marketing, here are the 3 that I gave that company just this past week. Total revenue, because we work with expansion and acquisition. And if I only work on acquisition, I'm not helping that side of the business. So total revenue. The other was total number of customers, because in this particular company, we know the more customers we have, the better that our revenue becomes over time, because their customers grow significantly over time, give us a shot essentially, and they are able to convert them into higher revenue. And then the third was one they haven't been tracking at all, but it is a huge metric for brand success. And it is a huge metric for the experience that your customers are having. And that is simply NPS, the Net Promoter Score. And if you're making sure that people have a good experience, you're keeping that NPS high. It's a signal of brand health, right? I can tell you lots of other ones, like a lot of direct traffic to your website is going to show as brand health too. But I can also tell you 5 different ways that number is not a true number, right? Like, because a lot of things get bucketed into direct traffic that are just Google didn't feel like categorizing them, essentially. So like NPS is one you control, and it shows you brand health. So you're aligned with sales because you got total revenue. You're aligned with sales and expansion, whatever those might be in your company, right? New sales and expansion. You're aligned with the growth metric that matters the most to the company. We know if we get more customers, we'll grow, right? And then you're aligned with keeping the brand healthy. So if you got to give me 3, those were the 3 I was choosing, right? The rest are all internal metrics that we can have a dashboard, and that's where we sit there and do our little thing and tweak and adjust the dials, right? Based on how the success of those 3 are. Now, one of the places a lot of marketers shy back from that is, what if sales doesn't do their job? Well, as a head of marketing, what I'm supposed to be doing is working with the head of sales on that. If I see a problem, we need to be sitting and powwowing regularly. If I can look at my numbers and their numbers and say, like, I see something, that's where that's supposed to happen, is up at the leadership team, right? So there has to be that trust between the departments. And if you don't have the trust to begin with, what are you doing? If your leaders don't trust each other, what are you doing, right? So I will say, just quickly, practically, the other thing, like you said earlier, Liz, is what happens if I'm going from 2 to 4, right? I've got 2 salespeople. I'm going to add 2 more. Where do I start? And I'll just leave with I'll land this with a practical tip, which is, I believe you need to start from the bottom and work up. Most people from marketing will come in and work from the top down. Like, let me drive a whole bunch of demand and a bunch of leads. You're just going to pay money to drive people into a bad experience. If you work from the bottom down, and you don't have to go super slow. If something ain't broke, you don't have to fix it, right? Work from the bottom up. Make sure your sales team has what they need to successfully deliver that client. Do they need a proposal? Do they need FAQs? Do they need pages on the website that have what they need? Do they need to understand the target persona? Whatever those things are, if you work your way down from the successful onboarding moment, essentially, so all the way through onboarding, work your way up through the sale, then when you do drive more demand, you can manage it internally.
Mike, do you have any last words on this topic?
I think combined, we've hit on all the really big things. I really appreciate Renee's focus on the very simple numbers, such as revenue, number of customers, and NPS. And if you're tracking more than that, you might be overcomplicating things to justify stuff. But that's really cool. Thanks, Renee.
And I'm tracking lots of other numbers, Mike, just like you are, right? Like in sales, You're looking at all the little stages and everything else. It's just, what am I accountable to?
Yeah,
right?
Good, great.
Right, like that, and that doesn't work without the trust. For instance, I had one customer that just had a massive influx of demand. Luck and circumstance essentially created the situation. And I kind of said something about, oh, we're benefiting. And he recognized and said, amazing how when you have a strategy and you do those things on top of it, you're able to take advantage of luck and circumstance. Right. And so all the things that we did. So the trust is that he recognized that all the work that we had been doing over the last year meant that when people had that need, they immediately turned to us. Right. So it takes the trust that he's going to recognize that to set those 3 numbers. That's that alignment at the top.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. We hope that we have made it a little easier for you to think about your scaling journey and that you're successful. Happy selling, everybody.